Good morning, fellas. Happy Monday to you. Hope you're doing well, and I hope you had a great weekend. It was great to have so many of you there on Saturday as we looked at 2 Samuel chapter 18, and I'm looking forward to the last 2 weeks of our ministry year here, closing out this incredible story of King David through the book of 1st and 2nd Samuel. If you're watching this, I presume it's because you weren't there on this Saturday. And there's so much more than I could possibly put in a short recap that we discussed. But there are a few things I just want to point out. If you weren't there, if you want to keep in step, I do hope that you'll be able to make it up to the last couple of studies that we have here. But we started looking at the end of chapter 17 as David goes to Mahanaim, which is the same city where Jacob and Esau, same location where Jacob and Esau reconciled way back in Genesis 32. And the thing that really stood out to me here is we see King David being supported and being surrounded by various pagans, non-Israelites, people who are coming out to support him in his time of need and his time of humility. And to me, there seems very much indication that this is a foreshadowing of the ultimate fulfillment of God's promise to Abraham that he would become a blessing to all nations. We have all of these folks from the neighboring towns who are coming to David because it seems that they see in him a king which is different, set apart, and in fact holy compared to the other kings of other nations. It seems that they see that David's kingship is not solely for his personal gain, his personal advantage, or the building of his personal kingdom, but to the way he leads and the way that he reigns points towards a kingdom which is larger than himself. And we actually see that as we get into 18. We see that David, in the midst of being betrayed by Absalom, in the midst of suffering horrendous consequences of his own sin, of his own disobedience, we see that King David is reticent to bring down judgment in a way that would make sense for an earthly king and for an earthly kingdom. It seems that any son who wants to rebel and be an upstart, a treacherous upstart to contest the throne, that the good and appropriate thing is to eliminate that risk and to wipe out anyone who would threaten your own life and your own kingdom. And clearly, part of David's challenge here is that it is his son. And clearly, part of David's reticence here is that it's his own flesh and blood. But as we talked about, and as I tried to make the case, I also think there's more at stake here. I think that in some ways, part of what David is wrestling with is the question of how does an earthly king image and reflect a heavenly kingdom? How does David, who continues to reign on the throne, not because of his own holiness or his own righteousness or his own obedience and faithfulness to the law, we saw just a couple chapters ago, grievous sin, which should have led to David's death. His adultery with Bathsheba, his intentional killing of Uriah should have resulted, according to the law, his death and the end of his reign. And yet God had mercy on him and showed kindness to him and showed grace by sparing him the just consequences of his own sin. And it feels like David is wrestling with this uncertainty and the confusion and a tenuousness in understanding how to be a king who reflects God's character and God's mercy and God's judgment upon those who rebel and sin against him as king of Israel. And so I think that, yes, in part, David is unwilling to come down hard on Absalom because he is his own flesh and blood. But as well, it seems that David is trying sincerely to figure out, how can I be an earthly king who reigns with a heavenly agenda? How can I be an earthly king who reigns with a desire to reflect the nature and the character and the mercy of God? And so he asks Joab and Abishai and Ittai to deal gently with Absalom. His commanders, however, his generals don't seem to be caught in the same tension. They seem to have a very clear sense as to what is right, what is appropriate, and what is good for the kingdom of Israel. And so they take matters into their own hands. And Joab, in particular, brings justice on Absalom by piercing his heart with 3 javelin. He pierces his hands, his feet. No, he pierces his heart with the 3 javelin. And then his men come around and finish the job. And it's amazing to see that Absalom then is cast into a pit. That strikes me. So many of the Psalms, David's crying out, asking that the Lord would rescue him from the pit. And Absalom here is cast into a pit, and he's covered with stones. He receives a burial of anonymity. He receives a burial of disrespect. He receives a burial where instead of being honored and being brought back to the family burial site, he is buried in the woods and covered with stones. And it makes reference to a pillar that Absalom had made for himself. And he made it for himself because he had no one to carry on his name. And again, to me, there harkens back to God's promise to David a number of chapters ago, where David received the promise of God that God was going to make David's name great, that David wanted to elevate God's name. And because of his desire to glorify God, God said, David, in response, I am going to make your name great. I'm going to make your family great. I will make your lineage great. That David was, again, here trying to rest in the promise that God had made, that the Lord was going to establish his throne, his kingdom, his lineage, his name, not for the sake of David, but for the sake of God, and God's name being glorified, and God's kingdom being revealed and being established on earth through David. So here we see David wrestling. How in the world is an earthly king supposed to reign justly in light of God's mercy? How in the world does God's mercy make itself known and seen and visible and real in a world where sin is evident? How in the world, in some ways, is David, he's trying to forecast what does it look like to be a king who lives according to the Beatitudes that Jesus declares in the Sermon on the Mount, to love one's enemy and to pray for those who hurt and persecute. Clearly, it's messy and it's hard, and it's something that we also need to wrestle with as believers. How in the world can we trust in God's promises that he will justify and he will vindicate and that he will accomplish his tasks and his purposes, even when people betray and slander and hurt and want to kill us? So a tough passage, and it was a great conversation. But hopefully, if you missed it this past week, you can come and check out. We wrap up, not this week, but next week. But we got 2 more weeks to go. So I look forward to seeing you. Hope you have a great week. Let me know if I can serve you in any way. And look forward to seeing you soon. Take care and God bless.